Greetings, everyone. This is Virtuous Roots, where we reclaim virtue to bring into our home and yours. I'm Thomas McCuddy.
I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Nick Wiegand. And today we're talking about relationship of the church family to virtuous discipleship. We're going to begin today with Hebrews 10:24 and 25. It says, "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." I know during this talks we've talked a lot about the role of the family in discipleship and the role of the church in discipleship. And I think a majority of people think that the place that children should get discipled, the place that people should get discipled, always falls within the church. And so, where does that come from? And is that the right way of thinking about it?
So, in our teachings, and one of our principles we live by is that the church is more like an auxiliary. The church is there to provide, like in the case of a pastor, many times churches will bring in a pastor or pastors in various roles who are specialists. They are coming in, they've had specialized training. They are there to equip the church, and
Hmm.
that in Ephesians, that these gifts have been given to the church for the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry. So the church exists in this way that we are to meet, we are to gather together, we are to lift each other up, but that should be going on in the home, and the church should support that because also, and again, I've served many years as a youth pastor. The church has access to the children so little compared to the amount of time they spend in the home.
That's true. Yeah.
And so the church in our home, we're kind of limited in people. There's only so many people in my home, and there's only so many skills, only so many things we bring. But you go into church, now you've got people of various trades, you've got people of various backgrounds, ages. That's where even for us, uh, in our particular situation, our nearest grandparent is about an 8-hour drive. So the church has many people have become almost like surrogate grandparents to our kids. They
Mhm.
can get that from the body, they can get that, they can learn from them, and it should never replace. Like I don't get to abdicate my responsibilities. I don't get to give that up, and hopefully someone else will disciple my kids. I think the biggest problem and the reason why we do this is because in our education system, we hand our kids over to often to have someone else educate them. So many times we'll treat the church the same way, and where homeschooling has blossomed in many places in many ways, where the parents have caught the vision. No, it is the parent who's ultimately responsible, and some parents have taken it upon themselves. That home discipleship is absolutely where it belongs, and just like we homeschool our kids, but sometimes we'll send our kids to people who can give them what we don't have. Like we send
Right.
our kids to guitar lessons, we send our kids to piano lessons, or we send our kid, like we even send our children to you, for example, handyman, you know how to build things, machines, tools.
Mhm.
I don't know those things. I don't pretend to. That is not my area. But for my boys to be around you more, to learn that, that's something they can't get from me, and I
Right.
want that, but you're not ultimately responsible for discipling them.
Right.
You're gonna give them some skills, and it's gonna be good,
I'm gonna teach
but
them not to chop their fingers off on a table saw.
absolutely, and that's super important,
Yes.
you can teach them what a table saw is because I don't have one, So I think this is why we need to look to the church for the right way. The church is meant to support. The church is an augment. The church is meant to emphasize and take what they're learning at home and, in many ways, expand, extend, and maybe, again, give them opportunities to serve in ways that they wouldn't have at home. All of this is where the parents should utilize the church. It's not a drop off program. I think even for parents who go to church with their kids, they treat it like a drop off program, and it was never meant to be that.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna obviously take the conversation a different way. T Quack, how old were you when you got saved?
32.
So you were 32 years old when you got saved. How old were you when you had your first kid?
I was 26.
So there's a negative balance there, right?
Mhm.
So the kid was obviously being raised in a non-Christian home.
Yep.
So when you got saved at 32, who discipled you at 32?
Um, well, I guess I was kind of self-discipled, but because there was a transition, we moved from New York down here. But I would say my pastor here, in North Carolina,
So what age were you when you finally got discipled?
I would say I probably just turned 33.
Okay. So that's way better than me. I spent a decade in the church of no discipleship. And so I hear what you're saying, and I 100% agree, especially now that I'm a pastor. I can't disciple your kids unless you allow them to come to Nick boot camp for 2 months, and then I can at least make some sort of impact. But until you're willing to allow me to take your kids and turn them into completely different people, um, there's an element where the church does have some sort of responsibility for discipleship,
Mm.
and so because I think many of us came to church, came to Christ so much later in life, there is a responsibility other than just auxiliary if we have immature baby Christians in our midst.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's almost, well, it kind of, if you go a little bit about my testimony, because my kids were, I had one at 28, and 18 months later I had my second, and then it was through this kind of dropping off our kids at church to supply with some morality that drew us to Christ to begin with. God used that. Like, we were like, my wife and I were like, look, we get an hour and a half of them. They go to Sunday school, they do whatever, and we can just go have coffee or something. But we started going to the services. We started going to Sunday school, and through that process, we're beginning with that idea where we're just gonna let's send our kids there. They'll have some, seems like a safe place for them. To the fact that we at now, you know, what God used to draw us to Himself, and for us to actually become part of the body of Christ.
It's very similar to my testimony.
Mhm.
I only went to church because my daughter learned some very unique words and behaviors from me that I decided she needed positive male role models. So I took her
Yep.
to a church. But so I mean, there's an element for the baby Christians, and I think even though I wasn't discipled, and you said self-discipled, I guess that's what we should be able to call it, like a self-study correspondence course. But the reality is, until there was Christian men in my life to truly show me the way,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any way I could have actually gotten to the point where it was that next step.
And to be clear, when I say auxiliary, I don't mean as in the church is in any way superficial to this process. As we're talking about discipleship, it should come alongside what's already going on at home. That's
Right.
the ideal.
Yeah.
Well, and so and I wasn't pushing back on that, but
Mhm.
you're talking from a mature Christian family standpoint, a
Right.
mature Christian mom and dad.
Right. Now, in the event that you don't have that, like in the case, I think I was about 13, 14 when I came to Christ. Family did not go to church, so I ended up going on my own, and it was that same kind of thing. That's where that was all I was getting.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that case, the church does become primary. It's not how it's supposed to be.
No.
That's not the function. But I think even in a mature Christian family, there are things that you're going to get from church that you can't get in the family. Like, you're supposed to utilize the gifts God has given you for the like edification of the body.
Right.
You can't do that without church. So I want to be clear. Church is super important.
Oh, I
Okay.
wasn't accusing
I
you of
know,
anything else.
Just in case, but again, anyone who's listening, like, oh, he doesn't think very highly of church. No, I do. I'm a pastor. I
He
very
doesn't think
much.
no, he thinks highly of church. He just wants parents to do their job.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the problem, because I remember the book, The Insanity of God, where when the guy who writes it, Nick Ripken, talks about he went around to the underground church in different countries and trying to learn from them. And one of the things that stood out in that book so much is that the underground church of Eastern Europe, they when they were underground, when they had to hide the fact their Christianity, they could not go to church. They would develop these, for the lack of a better term, they were house churches, 2 or 3 families getting
Mhm.
together. That's how they had church. And through the families and this engagement with families and their church, they put on a conference with youth during the time when they were supposed to be underground. Like, people went to jail for doing this. But they basically put kids in groups, and so these are teenagers, and said, all right, from what you know, because let's assume that all Bibles have been destroyed, reproduce the New Testament. And every group of teenager pretty much reproduced the entire New Testament. They were able to do this, like, just through families getting together,
This
just
is
through the
crazy.
families. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when the church was freed, and now they can have their churches, they have their meetings, they have their buildings. They did it again, and they realized that the teenagers, a generation was arising that did not know the Lord. They did not understand. So the fault is not with the church. It's not that, oh, church is a bad thing. That's not the communication. It's to realize that when we use things the wrong way, we're using them the wrong way. We're using them unvirtuously, would be the language we like to use. We say that's not the purpose. And so that's what I try to communicate to families, that if you're in a family and you're going to church, you want to use church the right way, or else you're going to fall into a vice of really excess in relying on the church to provide what it shouldn't be providing. It might be able to provide some things, like they will find godly role models, but they're only going to be around them for a little bit
Yeah.
compared to what they're getting in the home.
Right.
And that's where I want to press upon families, is to consider how they're using this. Um, and I think a lot goes into this, because we're also assuming, good, strong Christian families. But what happens when you have a church that maybe is dysfunctional?
So that was
Okay.
going to be my next question. I was
Yeah.
going to lead that into. So, you've made the point of, hey, church is important. And so how, and we're probably going to offend some people out there. I'm going to be honest with this one, with how I ask this question, but how do we find the right church to actually help us disciple our families in a virtuous way? Do we pick the place with the best coffee bars, with the best entertainment, and with the best children's program, where, you know, you get your little kiosk and check them in with name tags, and they get to go have their rock concert and learn absolutely nothing? Um, what is it about the church that we should actually be looking for? Is it just where I feel like I got fed this week, or what is it?
Well, and I think, well, from my point of view, and this is kind of like my view on discipleship in the church, is that, like, you want to go to a church where the pastor actually knows who you are, and the people that, because a lot of times you go and you can just, if it's just that kind of hands off approach, because my pastor knows that, like, the ins and outs of what's going on in my life, and he is not afraid to call me out on things when he witnesses it. Like if my kids, because I do a lot of the audio visual stuff in my church, because we're just filling in where we can, and so I'm back there, and I'm not always keeping my eyes on what my kids are doing, and sometimes my kids are not doing what they're supposed to do in the pew. They might be goofing around. My pastor can see that, and he brings it to my attention, or he goes directly to them, and he recognizes that, I have this. I don't want to push back. I want to allow him to do what he needs to do to properly shepherd my family. And I allow him to do that. And I think that's kind of a reciprocal kind of relationship. A lot of times people don't want their pastors. They want them to stand on the pulpit and keep at arm's length. But when they start really kind of digging into our lives, people are like, I don't really like that. Well, you're not supposed to like that. It's because you're not, he's trying to help. And I think that having a pastor that would, put his neck on the line in that sense, because a lot of times pastors won't do that because they're afraid that people will leave. And I think that reality, if you really want that, to be pastored, you really want to use the church, or have the church like disciple you in that way, you need to allow your pastor and have a type of pastor that will call you out when you're not doing what you ought to do.
So I know Cape Fear Baptist Church in Grace Creek, Fayetteville, North Carolina, isn't listening to this, but they should. A pastor all up in your business calling you out is a good thing. It's not the answer I expected. What about you, Thomas? What is what? So I like it though, because it's a sense of togetherness and belonging and intimacy that you're
Mhm.
describing in a church. What about you? What should we be looking for to find this?
So I know there's going to be people listening who are going to think, well, you go where the Holy Spirit tells you to go. Well, part of what the Holy Spirit, I think, calls us to do is sometimes use the mind that He has given us to make a good decision.
Mhm.
That we need to find a place and go to a church. We're always looking for a place where we fit. And if we're talking families, we're talking kids, we need to find a place that has that understanding of how to come alongside the family. And I think this is why when and by fitting, I don't mean like you necessarily culturally and everything, because my wife made the comment like it's been our custom. We go to places where we are not like the other people. She's like, we don't always fit, but then it becomes our family. And I think that for lack of a better term, I know it's a buzzword now, but that diversity where we
Mhm.
are not the same,
Mm-hmm.
we can learn from each other. I can, if I went to a church where everybody thought like me, that might actually be a bad thing.
Mm.
If my wife was here, she would specifically say that is a bad thing. Okay,
It'd be kind of
so
scary, not
yeah,
scary.
yeah. So there's a sense that in many ways with being ministers, we've often found ourselves like called to a church, and like so that's where we are
Right.
for
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever it is. I think some people they find themselves in a situation, and I think it's clear enough to say there's not a perfect church. There's not the church where it's going to meet every one of your needs, and it shouldn't be. I think it is that leading of the Holy Spirit, but also using that mind He's given you to recognize that if you need help with your children, like especially I think of like single moms,
Mm.
single dads who are having to raise their kids, they need to lean on that church more so than a family that has both parents in the home. They're going to have a completeness.
Yep.
They're going to have a they're going to have what these other families that are struggling that they're really looking for. Like in a case of like the single mom, she needs men who can come alongside her children.
Mm-hmm.
The single dad needs women who can show that love because again, for whatever reason that they found themselves single, the church needs to recognize that a family where the child might have um, some sort of either disability or some sort of issue, something going on that they're struggling with, whatever
Mhm.
that is. Again, that's so broad, but to have a church that can come alongside them. I know we need to recognize we're all broken in different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
And so even the family that has all its original members has a brokenness. And I think this is why the church is that auxiliary in a strong sense.
Yeah.
So I want to emphasize that, but I think it needs to stay that way to recognize that it does fall on the mom or the mom and the dad or the aunt or the grandparent.
Yeah.
That more and more I know in America, so many grandparents are having to raise their kids
Right.
for
True.
whatever reason. The church supplies and is the church supplies and is for them in many ways, what is lacking, that's the strength of the church.
Right. So
Uh,
definitely not picking churches based on the goosebumps that we get when the music plays.
Indeed.
Right. I say that kind of in jest, but there are elements out there. Somebody that we talked to at our church had mentioned in previous churches that he had been to, he had asked folks to disciple him, and it was a difficult thing to get. It
yeah.
was, excuse me. So, what kind of indicator is it that if you're looking for discipleship and it's difficult to find, what kind of indicator is that of a church?
Well, this is kind of like in terms of also if you're looking for a church and if you're listening and you're like kind of in just trying to figure out like where you fit in. And I think indicating like because part of discipleship is utilizing your giftedness. God, if He saved you, He's going to gift you in some way. And so I think one of the as we look at the church, it's not really like it's going to meet your needs in some sense because that's how the body works. Like there's where I'm deficient, somebody might be strong, as Thomas is alluding to, but also with the proper attitude of church life. Because a lot of people, there's people that sit on their couch on Sundays and don't think that they need church. They can just watch it on the television. That's not how the church was designed. The church was designed for us not necessarily to be, to utilize, like be use it, but to actually be serve in it. And I think for me, I find that we have young men or young people in the faith who once they found that they have a place in our church to serve and that the gift that God has given them is being utilized and appreciated, like they just like they explode, and they get so excited about the Lord. They get so excited about church life because it's not about what the church can do for you, but it's what you can do for the church. And I think that's like kind of like our concept of justice. It's not about what somebody owes me, but what I owe to that other person. I think that's how like the concept of virtue and justice kind of apply, at least from my perspective and kind of way I understand it. Um, when I'm thinking of my church, I'm not there to just be served. I'm there to serve. And I think and the discipleship comes in that way because we're beginning to recognize because you have people, you got to find somebody that's going to see that giftedness in you and then like take that and just kind of, just kind of like put that frame around it to really just like kind of how we see, like us, like, because a lot of times we're just trying to find a place where we fit in, where we're useful, and like, why am I here? Why did God save me? Well, He didn't just save you just to sit on a pew and be served. He saved you so that you can serve others and just have that kind of reciprocal relationship.
I think I should have started with this, but if we're all about recapturing language, can we recapture the word church? And can you please explain even what that word is and its origin as to what word it came from? And kind of just give me a brief overview so that at least we're all on the same page on when we say what is the church, what's its role in discipleship and in our families. Can you please recapture that word for me?
So in the Greek, you're looking at a word that refers to a congregation, and so church becomes a specialized concept, specialized kind of congregation. And this group that gathers together, they gather together for this same purpose, this worship, this coming together. We've turned church more into organizations and more like a business is some of the issue. Which again, as it gets bigger, you need hierarchy, you need the structures. But I think this is what we're trying to break away from. We're trying to recognize that original purpose of these families coming together. It's why in our ministry, part of our focus has been uh, strong families make strong churches. That is how you strengthen the church. So this is why when we go, as we talk about looking for a church, it's like Thomas was just saying, it's not just how can we be served, how can we strengthen this? What can we pour in? Because the church is going to benefit my family, I'm going to benefit the church, this group of people, not this institution. And I think that's why when
Hmm.
the family is not so much an institution, the family is this group of people, whatever kind of group of people you have together. And so that in many ways is what Jesus intended, is for his believers to gather together with this common purpose for this equipping. That was his mission plan to the world. This is the vehicle by which it goes forth. But again, as this group is supposed to come together for these reasons, you want to use that group for the right reasons.
Yep.
And that's why I think when we dump everything upon the church, well, what is the church? It's these group of people. And I think that's what happens. If everybody sends all their kids so that the church will handle, well then where are those people going to come from? How are you going to get that?
Yep.
There's an element of, even as I have my kids who are growing up, I'm discipling them, preparing them that they will be disciple makers, that they will be part of this in the future. The church has poured into them, they pour back. And then we face situations where we no longer where people who come to church, they say, hey, I need to be discipled. And I have so many instances of people who've gone even to big churches and there was no one there who felt equipped.
Hmm.
That's what we're calling for. That's why this emphasis with discipleship, that has to change in the family and in the church.
So you can't go to church, you can't watch church. It's being a part of the church.
Yep.
Mhm.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Well, gentlemen, that is a great conversation, and we got a couple of pastors here, so talking about church is something we could probably do all day. But we have to cut it off there. You can find us at familiesofvirtue.com. Our podcast, Virtuous Roots, is on all the main streaming platforms, and we will talk to you next time.